Hi everyone, this is Matthew Janda for CardRunners, and I'm here with Out of Position 3-Bet Pot Flop Play Part 2, Small Blind versus Button Play Continued. So quite the mouthful for the title. So the reason why I'm still talking about these ranges is, as I mentioned in the last video, they're probably about the most important 3-betting ranges in poker, and blind versus button open 3-betting ranges, so to make that clear, the button opens and we 3-bet from either the small blind or the big blind, are probably the most important 3-betting ranges in poker by a really wide margin. So it's important that we get these ranges down, and at the end of the day, we only went over like 3 or 4 flops in the last video, so it seems worthwhile to at least do one more video on these ranges, if not more than one, because it's just such an important spot that's pretty common and the pot's big. One other thing I wanted to briefly point out, because it's something I've been thinking about for the last couple of weeks, is I feel much less confident about what sort of the correct way to defend against a button open in the small blind is than in probably any other pre-flop spot in poker. So what I mean by that is, in most pre-flop situations, I feel like I have a good sense of what's probably correct. I mean, of course, what I'm doing isn't going to be exactly correct, and I might even be off by more than I think in some spots, but it's probably pretty good in most spots, whereas when we're in the small blind, after the button opens, it's really tricky to tell what to do. Because right here, you can see I have a pretty clear cold calling range, like King 10 suited, pocket 8s, Queen Jack off. And all these hands do well against the button opening range, and by calling, we keep a lot of the hands that we have dominated in the button's opening range. But the problem with calling with these hands is it makes us very vulnerable to squeezes, because we don't slow play any really strong hands. And the difficulty, of course, with slow playing any really strong hands in the small blind against a button open is there's only one person left to act, which is the big blind, so we might not get squeezed at as high of a frequency as we'd like. And in addition, when the big blind cold calls, which he'll do quite often since the button's often min-raising or only 2.5ing, we have to play out of position multi-way with a strong hand, which isn't ideal. So one thing I am considering doing is I could 3-bet I could stop 3-betting some of these weaker hands. I'm just going to randomly click some of the weaker ones. It doesn't matter, just whatever. And then we could start 3-betting some of these stronger hands and just calling less or not at all. So that might be what we're supposed to do here, especially if we find right now the small blind 3-betting range has only 52% equity on the flop and is out of position. So maybe that's not quite enough equity to really prevent the button from wanting to call with a very wide range pre-flop. So, bit of a rant there, but long story short is, as we're looking at these ranges, it's possible that we should just stop cold calling these hands, instead start 3-betting them, and then we'll stop 3-betting our weakest 3-bet bluffs. Alright, let's jump in. Alright, so I randomly generated a flop, and then I added in the information we're going to need to format the hand. So the first board was King 10-2 Rainbow. So the first thing that I usually do when I see a flop now, and this is kind of whether I'm in position or out of position, but I think how hard is it to check a call? And on this board, when we're out of position, it's not going to be that difficult to check a call because there are like 10x hands, Queen X hands, pocket jack type hands that could check a call. That doesn't mean we need to check call all of them because we might want to bet them for a single street of value or bet them for multiple streets of value or even check raise them if it's a really strong hand. But it's not that difficult to check call with sort of top pair and middle pair hands here. The next thing I want to do is see how equity's changed. Because my guess is on this board, the button range probably does pretty well. It would be doing even better if it had Queen 10 off. But even without that, the button cold calling range probably does pretty well because it calls with a lot of random 10 hands like Ace 10 off, King 10 off, a lot of suited 10s, and then a good amount of queens as well. Queen Jack off, Ace Queen off, and King Queen off. So because of that, I think the button range is going to go up in equity, so let's see. Queen of spades, 10 of clubs, 2 of diamonds. Oh, wow. Okay, so the button range has a lot more equity than I thought. I thought it would go up a little bit, but it went up like 7%, which is a big jump. So this is a very good range for the button caller because his equity just increased substantially, and that's usually going to mean it's a good flop for the button range if his equity goes up by a lot. So that's going to change the way we play this out of position, and it's also going to tie into what I said earlier, which is these hands maybe should be 3-bet pre-flop because they might not work that great as calls, and even if they're profitable calls, they might just be more profitable 3-bets, and this would, if we had 3-bet these hands, we'd connect on this board a lot better, because these hands right here include a lot of queens and tens, and it's just not that uncommon for the board to come queen high or 10 high. So it's important that we hit those queen high or 10 high boards. And here we just have a queen and a 10. So definitely something to think about.